everyone, my name is Katrina Walser from Oliphant and I am a knitting teacher and designer based in Sydney in Australia. And welcome to my monthly podcast on the needles. It's episode 15 today, which means that we are in November of 2022, and let's get going so I can show you everything that I've been doing this month. So before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I stand, the Darug people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So it's about the 9th of November, which means that this is about a week later than I normally do. I usually try and film in the first week of the month, but I had a cold last week, and so my voice is still a little bit raspy, so if I sound a bit odd, that's most of what it's down to. So if you are a returning viewer, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here again. I hope that you have been enjoying all the previous episodes and things. If you're new to this channel or to the podcast, then welcome. If you are looking for me on the internet in general, aside from just here on YouTube, you can find links to my Instagram and my patterns website and all of my designs and things down below. There's also a link to my coffee account, which is where you can buy me a coffee if you just get any sort of enjoyment out of these episodes, or if you learn a thing or two. The best way of supporting me is either hitting the like or the subscribe button here on YouTube, because that helps more people find the podcast. But also, if you feel like shouting me a coffee, I would be more than glad. I do have a caffeine sponsor for the previous month. Thank you again to my anonymous donor who's asked to remain anonymous. I don't have a coffee on me because it's about 4:30 in the afternoon, so I probably shouldn't be drinking any more. But I did have one earlier, so thank you very much. Okay, I've got a lot to talk about today actually, so I figure we should just get going. So first off, what I'm wearing today is my Daphne top by Friday Knits. If you've been here for a while, you'll have seen this before. It's this lovely sort of puffy sleeve top here. And then it's got this, what do they call it? A princess neckline. And then it just sort of goes down here. This is probably going to be the last time that I talk about this. This is like the 4th or 5th podcast episode that I've talked about this top on. If you were here last month, I did mention that the sleeves were falling down a little bit. I tried to crochet around the edge here to tighten it up a little. Still didn't help that much. So what I've just been doing is safety pinning the sleeves to my bra strap. So if you see an errant safety pin during this episode, yeah, that's why that's there. I am thinking of either sewing in some elastic, or what I might actually do is that I had some older tops before that had these little loops and buttons so that you could loop a little sort of bit of string or material around your bra strap and keep it in place. So I might try that as well. So we'll see how we go. Hopefully I can do something to make it so that the top's very wearable. If it just comes down to safety pinning stuff in, then I guess that'll be fine. So the first segment of my podcast is always on the needles, which is where I chat about all of my whips and FOs. Alright, so I have quite a few things to show you. They weren't all done this month, but I'll explain why I'm showing them to you in a sec. So the first FO that I have is my Rainbow Baby blanket, which I don't actually have on me, but I can show you a couple of photos here. So last month, I was most of the way through finishing the blanket. It was the smaller size of the blanket. So the pattern comes in 2 separate sizes. It's written for Wool & Works slub yarn and Bendigo Wool & Mill's 8-ply cotton held together. And it makes a really lovely material. The colours are all nice, and the fabric is really interesting because of the slubs. And so I wanted to give people options for either only getting 1 or 2 balls of the slub yarn, because hand-dyed yarn I know can get a little bit pricey. So I figured it'd be good to give people choices on how big they wanted to make it. So the one ball of slub size ended up being about 26 inches square. I'm sorry that I'm talking in inches and not in centimeters. For some reason, because I started designing in the States, I just learned how to measure in inches, and my brain just works that way now. So I don't know what it is in centimeters, but I can try and write it up here on the side for you. So the smaller size, yes, was 26 inches square. And what ended up happening is that I wanted to release the blanket on October 15th, which was Worldwide Pregnancy Loss Awareness Day. And if you want to hear the story about what it's got to do with all of that, just check out my previous episode. But I was running out of time to finish the bigger size of the blanket to have it ready for release day. So essentially what I did is that I finished the smaller size and I did the bind off and everything. And those were the photos that I took for the actual pattern. And they turned out really nicely. And then the thing is that I did still want to make the larger size because I did have a second ball of yarn from Wool & Works because Chloe was lovely and sent me the yarn as yarn support. So obviously I needed to use it. And I was gifting it to some friends. So I wanted them to have the bigger blanket. So I undid the bind off that I had done, and then I added in the second ball of the slub. It did mean that I undid about almost 400 stitches of I-cord bind off for the smaller size. But it was fine. It was fine. I've gotten sort of zen with I-cord bind offs, just because I had to do so much I-cord for this top. So I'm just totally fine with it now. It just is what it is. Now the larger size came out really nicely. It was about 36 inches square, which is a really sort of substantial blanket. So I'm looking forward to seeing the baby in the blanket. Hopefully I'll have photos of that sort of early January. That'll be really nice. If you do want to get the blanket pattern, I am donating 25% of all of the sales of the blanket that I make to SANS and the Red Nose Foundation, who are a set of partner companies in Australia. Companies is the wrong word. Foundations, who support people who are going through pregnancy loss issues. So far since release, I've managed to raise $83 for them, which I think is pretty cool. Thank you in a large part to Sylvia, who's my tech editor. She is Wild Iris Tech Editing, and she chose to donate her usual fee for the blanket edit to the Red Nose Foundation instead of having me actually pay her. So it's been really good. It's been a good release. And if you'd like to get the blanket pattern and help out with all of that, then there's a link to it down below. So my other FO that I made this month is actually something that I can't show you because it was a pattern for a yarn company, but it's going to be released next month. So I'll show that to you then. But speaking of pattern releases and things that I can't show you till the future, I have 3 FOs that I can show you today that I made previously that were patterns for yarn companies that only just got released this month, and so I can finally show them to you, so I'm very excited. So the first two I guess, are a set of beanies. The pattern is called Hidden Luxuries, and it is a free pattern that's available on the Knit Crate website. So I wrote this pattern for Knit Crate. It's part of their 12 weeks of gifting, which is this fun little campaign they do every year in the lead up to Christmas. So for the 12 weeks before Christmas, they release a new free pattern every week. And the idea is that the patterns start off quite large and get smaller and smaller in the lead up to Christmas. So if you have last minute Christmas gifts you need to make, then you can use one of the patterns that comes out in, the middle of November or the middle of December. So this was week 5 this year of the 12 weeks of gifting. And the beanie, I guess I should just show it to you. It looks like this. So there are two FOs that I have right now. There's this blue one here and this purple one here. And the reason that it's called Hidden Luxuries is that aside from this little like stripe of colour that's quite subtle here, it actually has a hidden brim underneath. That is the contrast colour. So this was the original sample that I made for the pattern, and I decided not to go with this needle size because I didn't like how floppy the material was. So this is Wool of the Andes Superwash Bulky. And I did the initial sample on a 8mm needle, and it's nice and it's quite like floppy, but it was just a bit too floppy. So I went down a needle size and I ended up with this little doobie here. So it was knit on 7mm needles, and the material's just quite a bit like a little bit more structured and tight, which I like. So this here looks like this. Amusingly enough, this is one of the pitfalls of working with international companies, 7mm isn't really a size that they have in the US. So I'm trying to make sure I get this right. I think 8mm is a size 11 in US sizes, and 6.5mm is a size 10.5. But they don't really have 7mm needles. So we ended up writing the pattern saying that, or like recommending that you use a 6.5mm needle because I'm a tighter knitter anyway, and the test knitter managed to get gauge on a 6.5mm, so it worked out okay in the end. So yeah, these are my two beanies. The contrast colour for both on the inside is actually some stash yarn I had from We Are Knitters. It is the petite wool. And the reason that I had to use a different colour is that I don't know what I was thinking. But when I talked to Knit Picks for yarn support, the two colours that I asked for were this. I don't really know why. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, they're both beautiful colours, but not together. So I ended up using this pea colour. This is Oyster Heather. So it's this lovely sort of pinky beige neutral colour. And that's what I used for the two hats, or for the two beanies. And then I just used the contrast from my stash. If you look at the actual pattern on the website, they made this really cool purple and yellow version of the beanie. So that was really neat. Now, the thing with Hidden Luxuries is that it's an idea that I've had for a really long time. So I made the initial prototype for this beanie maybe back in like 2018 or 2017. And it was actually a bit of an accident. So it's a beanie that I made for Wes, and he really liked this blue colour, and he did want it to be a double brim, but I didn't have enough of the blue to make the whole beanie. So I was like, well, you're not going to see the inside of the brim anyway, so I may as well make it in a different colour. And so I did. And then I decided I really liked it as like a design feature, because there's something about the inside, like things being on the inside of things that only you know about, that make things feel sort of fun and special. The main example that I have in my life is when you have like a nice lining in your handbag. So the initial version that I made, the contrast colour is like really hidden. There isn't even the little stripe of like extra colour. So it's a really easy mod if you want to make this sort of version. I don't feel too bad telling you about the pattern because it is a free pattern, so I'll put a link to it down below. But all you do is that in the pattern, when you're joining the brim together, it tells you to use the contrast colour as the join, and then you do one more stripe of contrast colour. Just ignore those bits. Just use the main colour and don't do the pearl row or round that it says. Just do it as a knit round, and that'll get you a version that looks like this. So yes, that's Hidden Luxuries. The other thing that I'll say is that Knit Picks are actually having a very big sale, like all month. So if you want to grab the actual yarn for it, I know for my Australian friends it's an overseas yarn, so it's a bit more annoying getting international shipping. But I do really like Knit Picks yarn, and they have some good deals going on. So if you've ever wanted to grab some, now's probably a good time to do it. And yeah, so that's Hidden Luxuries. The other FO that I wanted to show you is a set of fingerless mitts. I don't know if this pattern has a name. Would be helpful if I knew the name of my own patterns. If it does have a name, I'm going to pop it up here. So the reason that the pattern may or may not have a name is that it is the kit pattern for Knit Crate this month. So if you don't know about Knit Crate, it's a company or like product. Basically, it's a subscription service. You sign up and once a month, they send you a box that has some yarn and some patterns that you can make with that yarn. Also, they have some partner companies that they work with who do a quarterly box. So if you sign up to the specific Malabrigo box, for example, then you'll get a box once a quarter that has some like surprised yarn that you know is from Malabrigo. And the reason that I mentioned Malabrigo is that this pattern is actually the pattern for the Malabrigo crate that came out this month. And the nice thing about Knit Crate is that they have like exclusive colors. So this is the yarn. It is Malabrigo Dos Tierras, which is 8 ply or DK weight, and it is 50% merino and 50% baby alpaca. And oh my gosh, I love this yarn. So the color is a Knit Crate exclusive. It's called Dryad, and it's just this like mix of foresty green and light green and yellow. I don't know. I've always been a bit of a sucker for Malabrigo yarn, and this is no exception. So with the mittens, I really, really wanted to make fingerless mitts because selfishly I want a pair for myself. My hands always get really cold in the winter. And the yarn was so squishy that I thought it'd be a really good complement or like a really good yarn to use for mitts. And the thing with really variegated yarn is that it can be hard to find a pattern that works nicely with it, because if you try and add too much texture to the pattern, you sort of lose it in the colors. But one of the things that does work really nicely with variegated yarn are slip stitch patterns. So these mittens, the cuff and the top part are just twisted rib, but then the middle section where your hand is, that's a slip stitch pattern. That is actually a pattern that I adapted from my Cozy Sunday Fade blanket. I just used that stitch pattern to make it into fingerless mitts, and it worked out really nicely. It photographed beautifully, not gonna lie. These shots are like amazing. So whenever I design for Knit Crate, they actually take the sample. So the actual mittens that I made, I sent off to them already, but I do really want to make myself a pair. I think what I'm going to do actually though is use this color as the contrast. So I'm going to use this for the ribbing in the cuff and in the top part, and then use this for the main color. And I think that'll work out really nicely. So this is also 8 ply yarn. It is Bendigo Wool & Mills Luxury, and it's in Amazon green. It's just this like really nice dark foresty green, and they go really well together. Now, if you do really like this yarn, because it is a Knit Crate exclusive, the only way you can get it is to sign up to the Malabrigo box for this month. I went and checked on the website, and they do actually still have some available. So if that's something that you want to grab, and you want to grab the pattern too, like the pattern comes with the yarn, then I'll put a link to it down below. There's also a discount code that you can use that'll get you, I think, like 20% off. So I'll put that down below as well. And you can grab some of this beautiful yarn. I think you get 2 skeins or hanks in the box. So that's all of my FOs. And then in terms of whips, I only have one main one right now. So, if you were here last month, I mentioned that I wanted to make an Ayami cardigan. So this is a pattern by Isabel Kramer. And oh my gosh, guys, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. Look at this thing. I just I don't know. I'm just loving this thing. Okay, so details. The yarn is called Merisilk. Well, okay. It's pretty funny. Like, I bought 6 skeins of this stuff, and each skein was labelled slightly differently. So I forgot to grab it. One sec. So this is the yarn. It's from Glenhaven Knits, who are a local dyer. I think maybe they're based up in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. And so this particular skein is labelled Merino Silk DK 8 ply, but some of the skeins were labelled Merisilk DK 8 ply, so I don't quite know what they want to call it. But like the name may suggest, it's a 75% merino, 25% silk, and it is 8 ply. But that's why it's so shiny. It is lovely. It's just like this color, oh my gosh. And like, I don't know if it has something to do with the way they dyed it or with the yarn itself, but it has this so much just like subtle variation. So there are little spots where the yarn is a little bit darker, somewhere it's a little bit lighter, somewhere it's almost white, and it's not super obvious, but it just makes a lot of nice visual interest, especially because so much here is just stuck in it. So Ayami is actually written for worsted weight or 10 ply yarn. So the gauge suggested in the pattern is 20 stitches on a 4mm needle using 10 ply yarn. But I really wanted to use the DK or the 8 ply, and I looked on Ravelry and quite a few people had managed to make it work with the DK weight. So I went ahead and tried this, and I'm getting 21 stitches on a 4.5mm needle. So I did try the 4mm needle like it suggested, but like I said, I'm a bit of a tighter knitter anyway, and I didn't like the material that I was getting with a 4mm quite as much. So with 21 stitches, it's not too far off what the actual pattern gauge is meant to be, but I did have to do a bit of math just to double check which size that I wanted to make, because even small changes to your gauge will change the final outcome of the garment. So I think if I had gotten gauge, I should have made a size 2, but given that my gauge is a bit tighter, I decided to go with a size 3, but even the size 3 was going to be a little bit too big still. So luckily what ended up happening is that as I was making the yoke, I realized that if I left the final increase round out, it would actually make the size sort of perfect for what I wanted. So I just did that. And it also means that the stitch count is still correct, because you end up doing this like lace cable-y pattern at the bottom again as well. And it was just sort of lucky that in the size that I was making, leaving that round of stitches out didn't throw the stitch count out enough that it would muck up the cable pattern. So that just worked out really nicely. So it is mostly the size 3 up until about here, and then it sort of turns into a like size 2.5. And this knit up so quickly. I just had a very productive day, the first day that I cast on. So I got through, I think, the whole yoke in a day. And then what I decided to do was I wanted to knit the sleeves first, because I always get sort of demotivated when it comes to sleeves. I get stuck on Sleeve Island really easily. So I did the sleeves before the body, which is why these are done and the live stitches are down here. It did take a long time to get the sleeves done. I had a couple of Knitting Mojo breakdowns this month. A large part of it was because the finished object I'm not allowed to show you yet. Designing sometimes is just like, sometimes when you're designing something, you just sort of write the pattern and it works out perfectly. And sometimes when you're designing something, you think it's going to be the simplest thing in the world and it ends up being quite complicated and you have to frog it a million times. And that's what happened with this particular item. So I was feeling a bit demotivated about my knitting in general, just because it was being so tiresome, I guess. I feel like I had 2 skeins of yarn and I knit them about 5 times each. So because of that, I also sort of lost the motivation to work on the sleeves of this, because I'm never really motivated for sleeves in the first place. I also got myself really tangled up. I was trying to so for one, I did them 2 at a time, which I do all the time. I always do my sleeves 2 at a time when I can, just because it helps me keep progressing forward. Just because then once you're done, they're both done, and you don't have to make one and then make the other. But I was trying all these different techniques around using 2 long needles, or 2 long circular needles instead of 1 needle and magic looping it. And I was just getting myself, there were balls of yarn everywhere and needles everywhere, and I was just getting too tangled up. So I decided to just go back to what I normally do. I just used 1 needle and did a big magic loop and did the sleeves 2 at a time. And then I was done. But I am really glad that I did the sleeves first, because now I get to just work round and round and round in small circles in the body. And I think I'm pretty much done with the stockinette. I have about ½ an inch left of the stockinette to do. And then there's one more little repeat of some of this cable pattern at the bottom, and then the bottom ribbing, and I'm done. So I'm hoping I'll have this done in the next couple of days. And I'll have it to show you next month. Sadly enough, the weather here is still going up and down enough that I might still get some use out of this. So I'll be glad to get my jumper, but I'll be sad that I'm wearing it in spring. And then the last whip that I have to show you is, don't know whether or not to call this a whip, but we're going to call it a whip because I thought it would be a fun journey to take you on. So I have been trying to bug Wes for ages to let him me make him a jumper. And there are lots of reasons that he hasn't wanted me to. A lot of them have been quite sweet. So he knows, especially because I knit for work, he knows that my knitting time is in short supply, just in general, and he didn't want to take up too much time asking for something that, for him, which is really nice of him. Also, he's quite picky when it comes to his clothes, and so he just doesn't generally like the idea of having me spend a really long time making something if he can't see it before it's made, which you can't see, but you know what I mean. So he just didn't want me to make him a jumper for a really long time, for lots of reasons that I really appreciate. But I finally convinced him that it's a good idea, and so he wanted a big cable jumper, I think mostly inspired by the cable jumper from Knives Out. If you've seen Knives Out, that big white cable jumper that, what's his name? Captain America. Can't think of his name right now. I will post a picture here. He wears this lovely cable jumper. So after lots and lots and lots of searching for patterns and looking at different jumpers, we narrowed down what it was that Wes actually wanted. So he did want a shawl neck to keep his neck nice and warm. And then he also wanted, cables obviously. And then he wanted it to be a jumper, and he wanted the cables to be more panels rather than all over texture. So the first pattern we found was something by Patty Lyons, and it was perfect. He saw it and he was yep, let's do that. But then it turns out that jumper, it's called Affinity or something like that, and it is part of a paid for course. You can't just buy the pattern, and it was $30 US, which I'm sure I would learn some things from it because, it's a Patty Lyons pattern, so it's going to be pretty good. And from what I understand, she's a really good teacher. But I just couldn't bring myself to buy that pattern. So after a lot more searching, and thanks to my friend Vera, who suggested this pattern, we found Porter from Hudson & West. Now, Porter's actually a pattern for a cardigan. And so the thing is that given all of the constraints and all of the different details that Wes wanted, the thing that would have made the most sense would probably have been for me to just design the jumper, but I haven't designed any men's clothes before, so I don't really know what all of the considerations are around designing for men. So I figured it'd be better for my first time making a men's jumper, I should probably just use a pattern. But I do know enough to be confident that I can convert this cardigan pattern into a jumper pattern. So I'm going to do that. So Porter is written for one of Hudson and West's yarn. It's called Forge, which is a 10-ply yarn. And I went and did the maths and figured out how much it would cost. And especially given the conversion rate right now, I think if I bought the yarn, like the suggested yarn, it was going to cost about $350. And that was not something that I could stomach. So I've been on a journey for the last month or so trying to find a good yarn for this pattern. So the first thing I did was try this. So someone I know from the knitting community in Australia was selling cones of Holst Super Soft. I think that's what it's called. And I thought that maybe if I held these two together, it would make a nice material for the jumper, because Wes said he wanted like a rusty orangey colour. And the colour turned out perfectly. This is the little swatch that I made. But the material just doesn't really feel right. It's a little bit too thin and it didn't hit gauge at all. Like not even close. So had to go back to the drawing board a little bit. And the thing is that I do think that I want some non-superwash yarn because I want the jumper to last for a really long time. So, and especially with the cables and the stitch definition and just all of that sort of stuff, all of those considerations, I do just want to try something non-superwash for once because I usually knit with superwash yarn. So what I think I've decided on is that given the knit picks are on sale at the moment, I'm going to go with their Wool of the Andes worsted non-superwash. And they have a colour, I forget what the colour is called. I'll pop a picture of it up here. And it was just the right sort of like rusty orange. The only downside to this plan is that I worry that it'll be a bit itchy for the shawl collar. But what I'm thinking of doing is probably getting a ball or two of the superwash version of the yarn. So the nice thing about the Wool of the Andes yarn is that it comes in both superwash and non-superwash versions. So I think I'll buy a couple of balls of the superwash version and then the rest of the balls in the non-superwash and use the superwash yarn for the collar and like the cuffs, just so it's not itchy because Wes doesn't like itchy yarn. So that's my current plan, but if anyone has any suggestions for a good 10-ply non-superwash yarn that comes in like an orangey colour that isn't going to break the bank, then I would be all ears. So please let me know. So clearly I haven't cast this on yet, which is a bit of a funny thing to be talking about in whips, but this is going to be a really long running project and I'm putting like, this is the most I've thought about a project for a really long time. So I figured that I would just spend the next couple of episodes talking about it and like showing you the progress and all the things that I've been thinking about with it because I thought that might be an interesting exercise. So those are my whips and that's all of the knitting content that I have for you today. So the next section is Off the Needles, which is where I talk about other random things that I'm thinking about this month, sometimes knitting related, sometimes not. This month it's very definitely not knitting related. So the thing that I want to talk about today is that I have started sewing. I think I just got a little bit burnt out with all of the knitting that I was doing for work and I just wanted another hobby that didn't feel like a job. And I've had my sewing machine for a really long time. So I started my Etsy store initially back in like 2010, 2011. And at the time, I figured that knitting wasn't going to be worth it because it just takes so long and the return on investment didn't seem great. So the first iteration of my Etsy store were actually these little zipper pouches. And I got a nice machine. And so I do know how to sew really basic things. But I just wanted to start making my own clothes. So I started sewing when we got back from the States. So in early September. And I thought it'd be cute to start a little sewing journal. So I've been putting notes and things in my journal. I just sort of like say what it is that I've been making, and then I have a little like photo of it and little like swatches of the material, and just thought it would be fun to like track my progress, because I don't know enough about the sewing community to know what the sewing equivalent of Ravelry is, and so I wanted to keep like project notes, especially because I have some patterns that I think I do want to make multiple times, and so I thought keeping notes would be a good idea so that I know what I want to like change or what I remember for next time I make stuff. So I promise this isn't going to suddenly turn into a sewing podcast. I know there are a lot of mixed like knitting and sewing podcasts. If anyone has any ideas about why a lot of knitters also like sewing, I'd be interested to hear them, because they're similar crafts, but not that similar. But I do know a lot of people who like doing both. So it's not suddenly going to become a sewing podcast, but if you are interested, let me know, and every so often I'll just do an update on what I've been making, if you want to see that. So far the things that I've made, the very first thing I made was this little drawstring bag, which I'm very proud of. It is my first real project bag. All of my project bags to date have just been little like drawstring calico bags that I've picked up, or like canvas bags that I've picked up from various places. But I wanted to have like a real project bag, and I very definitely wanted it to be a drawstring, because I don't like zips in my project bags, because the idea of my yarn getting caught freaks me out. So this was a free tutorial that I just found on YouTube, and it worked out really nicely. It is quite substantial, but it's just a little bit too small to fit a jumper in it. So I might make a second one that is just a bit bigger, if I can figure out how to if I can figure out how to alter the pattern enough that I can make it bigger. And then I made Amelia a bucket hat and a little crown thing, because she's been a bit obsessed with crowns recently. I don't know, so I made her a little fabric crown. And those were both patterns from Waves and Wild, who I think she's an Australian designer, so that's really cool. And then the most recent thing that I've made is a little dress for my niece. It's a pinafore, so it's backless, but it has these really cute like butterfly wing things. So I'll pop a picture of that here. And I have plans, and like I already have material to make a set of these. So I'm going to make one for my daughter and one for my other niece, so like my niece's sister. Their birthdays are both in January, and Christmas is coming up, so I'll make it for them either for Christmas or their birthdays, and hopefully I can get a picture of all three of them together, because I think that would be really cute. So yeah, that's my sewing progress. It's been really fun, actually. Sewing always sort of freaked me out, mostly because I don't like the idea of cutting fabric, because I'm scared of making a mistake. Because at least with knitting, if you make a mistake, you can just frog it. With sewing, when you're cutting the material, if you make a mistake, you're just done. You've just sort of wrecked it. But I am trying to get over that and just like cut my material and go for it. So yeah, it's been pretty fun. And a little frustrating at times, which is, I think, true of any new hobby that you pick up, because learning new things is always interesting and always a bit of a challenge. And I'm definitely learning a lot. So I've been having a really good time doing it. Aside from the dresses, my next project is going to be a pair of shorts for me. I already have the linen picked out, and I can't remember the pattern name, but I'll put a picture of it up here. And I'm hoping to have those ready for the summer. So the last section of my podcast is always up next, which is what I'm doing for the next month. So after my Ayami, for the first time in a really, really long time, I don't actually have any pattern designs that are due for third-party companies. So it's really exciting because I can just make whatever I want, which feels like a very strange position to be in for me. So I have two options right now. The first option that I'm thinking of is, oh goodness, Okay, it's a new pattern and a new to me designer, so please don't shout at me because I cannot remember either her name or the name of the pattern. But I will put the info up here. It's this gorgeous shawl, and I told myself I wasn't going to make any shawls. I have too many shawls, but I saw this pattern and I was like, oh my gosh, I need it in my life. So it's this gorgeous like mix of just merino, fingering yarn, and mohair. And if you've been here for long enough, you'll know that I don't love mohair, but I'll make an exception for this because it's just used in such an interesting way with like the sheer panels. And the yarn that I'm planning on using for that is something I'm really excited about. So I've had this in my stash for forever. I got this at Rhinebeck in 2018. And it is from Bijou Basin, who don't exist as a company anymore from what I understand. And it is a mix of camel and silk. And I've just never known what to do with it because I wasn't knitting shawls anymore. And then I have this one last colour, like this purple yarn, which is also very special. So my parents picked this up for me when they went travelling in Denmark, I think. And this is also a merino silk mix. I think the three together are going to be beautiful. And then I just have some random mohair in my stash. So this is from Louie and Lola. I can't remember the colour. It's something about olives. But it's this like lovely green with like specks of yellow. So I think that'll look really nice as a contrast colour to the solid green. And then I have just a plain white mohair that I think will go nicely with these two. So I'm very excited to cast this on because it's going to be beautiful. The other option that I have, which makes a lot more sense for the current climate because we're going into summer, I was thinking of making an Adira top by Truly Myrtle. And I have some Sandusgarn tin line, which is, I've heard a lot of Sandusgarn, like I've heard a lot about Sandusgarn just from watching people's podcasts and stuff. And I happened to see some in a store that I was in the States. And so I figured I'd pick it up. I think it's a cotton and linen mix, but I'll put the details up here. And I have it in this lovely like pink color. So those are my two options. Let me know what you think that I should make next because I'm very torn. Realistically, I should probably make the Adira now because it's a t-shirt and then make this shawl later, but I'm really excited about this, so I may just like cast it on anyway. So those are my plans for the next month. I do have some patterns coming out, but I will show them to you in the next podcast episode. And yeah, that's all I've got for you today. If you are a new viewer and you have stuck all the way through to now, thank you very much for watching. If you would like to keep seeing updates from me, then you can hit this subscribe button just here. And if you want to see all of my previous episodes, there's a playlist of all of my podcast episodes right here. But other than that, I'm Katrina Walser from Oliphant Cat, and I'll see you next month. Happy knitting!